We got a problem here. First, I don't do well with prepared speech, and I do have one because some of this is rather new to me. And secondly, I left my glasses back in Madison, so this combination is really going to be bad. I'd rather not use the prepared speech. I'll just use it as notes. I was first elected Mayor of Madison in 1973, did that for 6 years, left, came back in 1989 for 8 years, and then in 2011 came back for a third time as mayor. The reason this is important is that on the second anniversary of this last tenure, the reporter who had covered the election in 2011 came to me to do a 2-year piece. And the first thing he said was, I went over my notes of the campaign, and I can't find one instance where you or your opponent said the word food. Now that's all you talk about. What happened? And keep in mind, I've not been new at this, and I've been involved with social justice issues basically my entire life. And in the introduction, it was mentioned that I was raised in Hyde Park, and I can recall as when I was as young as 4 and 5 in 1949 and 1950, going with my parents to the Hyde Park Co-op, which was the institution there for close to 40 years. And there's a story in there about why it failed and finally collapsed. But in any case, 3 years ago, Mayor Villaraigosa of Los Angeles was president of the Conference of Mayors and decided that during his tenure he was going to make food a major issue. He had already hired Paula Daniels, one of about 8 or 10 cities in the country now have a specific food policy advisor in the mayor's office, and went on to appoint Mayor Menino of Boston and Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blank of Baltimore as the chairs of the task force. Well, Mayor Menino has left office, and Mayor Rawlings-Blank is doing other things, and I suddenly inherited this position as the chair. So what are we going to do with it, and what does it have to do with my being here with you today? I'm really excited. I'm excited for one singular reason. There is a tremendous untapped resource out there in terms of the mayors, in terms of the cities, and in terms of representatives in Congress from urban and suburban areas who have basically ignored the food bill for decades, for generations. And if we are going to do this right, we are going to get them engaged, and we are going to get them engaged on the right issues and the right policies. Now let me mention that in August, late August, the Food Policy Task Force is going to be meeting in Louisville, Kentucky. Any mayor who is a member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors can attend. Now, normally when the task force meets, we have between 12 and 15 mayors showing up. My experience is that someone like myself reaching out to the mayors has minimal value in terms of their activity and their participation. However, when their constituent base contacts them and says this is important and asks the question, why aren't you going, why aren't you participating, why aren't you engaged, somehow they become inspired. If you would like to know whether or not the mayor in your city or the next largest city over is a member, simply go to the U.S. Conference of Mayors website, go to mayors, and you'll find out whether or not their city's involved. We want their participation, and I'll get in a moment to what is on the agenda. The other thing that I want to tell you about is my own experience. My predecessor, and I don't mean to get into a debate with him on the last election, But he was focused on a public market. We did say public market, by the way. We didn't say food. And he and I had a very different vision of that public market. And I think that is critical. I hope I don't offend anyone here if you had his vision, but I think it stunk. The city of Madison at the time, and still is working on a project in downtown Madison to the tune of about $100 to $120 million probably when we get done with it. And his vision was to have the public market on the ground floor of this downtown building. Right now we're working with the Project for Public Spaces. We've talked to some folks from Detroit about their public market, and my vision's a little bit different. We're pointing more towards perhaps taking an old shopping center or taking a used car dealership that's vacant. There's a couple of those. Lots of space, lots of room, and as you'll see in a second, a place for real people. I'm not interested in creating something for tourists, and that's not a priority for our city's agenda. The first year I was in office, decided to take a tour alone, and I hopped over to Cleveland and then dropped down to Harrisburg, York, Lancaster, and Philadelphia. Then the following year, we grabbed our plan director, our economic development director, our food policy coordinator, who we now hired by this time, and a real estate agent, and we did Chicago, Grand Rapids, Detroit, back to Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. Many of those cities, by the way, do have Major League Baseball teams. Well, we saw four games along the way. Where was I? The point being, as we went from one market to the other, the message that I kept feeling was you need a market for real people. You need a market which the retail end of it is accessible to folks who want fresh food to put on their table and eat well at a reasonable price. We don't have the capacity for $18 a pound tomatoes. We have the capacity for food with dirt on it. Secondly, it can be used critically in terms of wholesaling. Then there's the whole question of aggregation. Then there's the whole question of how you work with area farmers in terms of centralizing and distribution. That's what I think is the vision. Getting there is not very easy in the present economy, particularly given the nature of American U.S. agriculture policy and how it's structured to encourage the production of fats and sugar. So how are we going to change this? First, we're going to have to recognize on an urban scale there's going to have to be public subsidies. There will have to be public subsidies if we're going to make this work. And there's no getting around that. But those public subsidies can be leveraged to produce healthy food and jobs. Healthy jobs revolving around the production and the distribution and the sale of food. I want to point out that this is critical if we're talking about education. Outside of the classroom, there are, I believe, 3 areas where we can focus in terms of kids. Leave the academics to the teachers. But those 3 areas are out of school time, parental involvement, and trauma. And trauma is divided into 2 areas. domestic violence and what happens on the streets, and hunger. I was giving a speech to a group of retirees a few years ago, and I rhetorically asked the question, what is the greatest impediment to a child learning during the course of the school day? And in an audience about the size of this, the response was, and I only asked the question rhetorically, was hunger. And so I replied, how do you know that? And someone yelled out, well, most of us are retired school teachers. It is critical that we get educators involved in this discussion because children do not learn, and half the time they are either going hungry or they're getting lousy meals through the public school system. This is a great opportunity to make a difference. Well, it all comes back to the Farm Bill, and on that, I don't want to get into the content. You all know that. But there's one simple message. If you go into the urban and the suburban communities, those members, particularly of the House of Representatives, have had a free pass on this legislation. They leave it to the representatives of their party from the rural areas to fashion that bill. And it is our obligation to contact them and start building the elements of change which will affect everything from production to distribution to how well we eat. Thank you.